Hello, back again on the Top Recap channel. This time I will tell a movie's entitled Counter-Strike. Let's get straight into the storyline. The story begins by showing 5 men driving home. It is known that the person driving is Armando. He and his 4 colleagues have just received a 3-day leave. They all seem to be enjoying the trip until suddenly, Armando and his group were attacked by the cartels. They immediately got out of the car and fought the cartels. After winning the battle, Armando asked all his colleagues to prepare because the other cartels would definitely come soon. The scene moves to 72 hours before the incident. Here, we are introduced to a girl named Atenea, who is about to go to the city with her aunt. Before leaving, Atenea says she is too lazy to go to the city to find a job. She says living in the village can make money if she is willing to farm. However, her aunt replied that jobs in the city were more promising than farming in the fields. In short, when they were almost in town, Atenea asked her aunt to stop because she felt sick. Quickly, the aunt stopped the motorbike, as they were also only 15 minutes away from their destination. However, while Atenea was spitting out the food she had eaten that morning, she was suddenly shocked to see dozens of bodies that were not properly buried. Her aunt tried to look at it until she was convinced that the mass graves were victims of the cartels. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Armando is seen enjoying coffee with an old friend at a bar. There, Armando gives some of his money to his friend because his friend's son has just started school. After chatting, Armando paid for his drinks, including his friends.
Mike, uno trata de ser cortés, pero bueno.
Guerrero. Nos vemos.
No, ¿cuándo nos vemos? Yo también me voy.
As he was leaving the bar, Armando saw Atenea and her aunt, who were about to complain to the police about the mass grave they had just discovered. However, at the same time, Atenea and her aunt were arrested by the cartel, while the police seemed to want nothing to do with them. Armando, who saw the incident, tried to approach them, but his friend begged him to return to the bar and not interfere. Apparently, his friend was afraid that Armando would be harmed by the cartels. However, Armando was still determined to approach them. One of the cartel members, named Sergio, warned Armando not to interfere if he didn't want to die silly. However, Armando continued to act. In the end, Sergio was cornered by Armando until the police showed up. However, instead of arresting the cartels, the police pointed guns at Armando. Quickly, Armando gave his identity card to the police chief. Suddenly, the police chief was surprised to learn that Armando was the captain of the first batch of special forces.
Ponga mucha atención. Soy capitán primero de las Fuerzas Armadas de México.
Realizing Armando was an influential figure, the police chief immediately ordered his men to arrest Sergio's group. Before leaving, Auntie and Atenea approached Armando and told him that they had found dozens of bodies at the end of the road. She also explains that this is why they were almost kidnapped by the cartels. Long story short, the government sent soldiers to check on the dozens of bodies that Atenea had previously found. After being evacuated, the victims were given a proper burial, as it turned out that they were members of the army who were on a mission against the cartels. A minister of defense was seen talking to a military colonel the next day. During the conversation, the colonel said he would reform a team to eradicate the cartels. Hearing this, the minister of defense agreed and fully handed the task to the colonel. Shortly after, the colonel called the captain of the special forces he relied on in this mission. As it turned out, the special forces captain was none other than Armando. Then, the colonel told Armando that he and the defense minister had agreed to send him on a cartel eradication mission. Therefore, Armando only needs to choose the soldiers he will take on this mission with him.
Pues cuente con todo mi apoyo, capitán.
At the same time, we are introduced to a man named Ramos, who is baking a cake for his 2 children. Soon, his 2 children appear with his wife. Ramos seems to love his family very much. In fact, almost every day, he always takes the time to make food for them. A few moments later, there was a knock on Ramos's door. He immediately approached him. It turned out that it was Sergio, a cartel member who had been arrested by the police yesterday. Here, we are finally told that Ramos is the boss of the Mafia cartel and the ruler of this city, while Sergio is his younger brother. Then, Sergio explained that the mass graves of the soldiers they had massacred had now been revealed. It happened because they buried the bodies of the soldiers not too deep, plus yesterday it had rained. Hearing this, Ramos was angry, so he asked Sergio to always be careful. Ramos also told Sergio to finish anyone who dared to disturb their group. 2 hours later, we see Atenea, who is still in shock because yesterday, she and her aunt were almost kidnapped by the cartels. The aunt asks Atenea to calm down because they are both safe. However, at the same time, someone knocked on their door. When the door is opened, it turns out to be Sergio's men. In the end, Atenea and her aunt were successfully kidnapped by their gang. At the same time, Captain Armando was preparing his troops for a mission to eradicate the cartels. Their main target is to capture a man named Eduardo. It is known that Eduardo is Ramos's right-hand man, who has been running the distribution of illicit goods. As for Ramos himself, the government still does not have strong enough evidence to arrest him. Then, Armando explained that in the next 2 hours, Eduardo often hung out at a restaurant, where they would catch him. Not to forget, Armando also told some of his subordinates to disguise themselves as ordinary citizens hanging out at the restaurant.
Nos vamos en 15. Éxito.
Long story short, Eduardo and his men were seen coming to the restaurant. Here, he immediately ordered food. On the other hand, 3 of Armando's subordinates were already at the restaurant to monitor Eduardo. Feeling that this was the right time, Armando's subordinates immediately ordered their troops into the restaurant. As a result, Eduardo and all his men who were there were captured easily. Then, when Eduardo's group was about to be taken to the city by speedboat, one of his men was seen hiding in the car, ready to shoot. But as it turned out, Armando had prepared a sniper who had been on standby on the hill from the start. In short, Eduardo's group was handed over to the authorities, meaning that Armando and his troops had successfully completed the mission.
Vámonos.
The next day, the colonel called Armando into his office and thanked him for carrying out his mission so well. Then, the colonel asked if Armando wanted a leave of absence, and Armando said yes. In the end, the colonel gave Armando a 3-day leave. In fact, the leave also applies to anyone from Armando's men who wants leave.
Y por favor, disfrute su fin de semana y felicite a su compañero de mi parte.
De su parte, mi coronel.
The next day, Armando was seen approaching 4 of his members. It was known that Armando and these 4 members would take a 3-day leave. Because they came from the same city, they agreed to go home using one car.
Con respeto. De esas selfies.
Bien, 1, 2, 3.
On the other hand, the Minister of Defense was seen meeting someone somewhere. As it turned out, the person he was meeting was Ramos. It turned out that the 2 of them had been working together all this time. Ramos immediately gave the Minister of Defense a suitcase of money as his monthly ration. Then, the Defense Minister gave Ramos a mobile phone, which was connected to Armando's mobile phone. The Defense Minister told Ramos that Armando and his 4 members were on leave today. The Defense Minister said that in order for Ramos's business not to be disturbed again, Ramos should immediately finish off Armando. In a distant place, it turns out that the meeting between the Defense Minister and Ramos had been deliberately recorded by Sergio. This was certainly done so that the cartels would have evidence of the Defense Minister's crimes. 10 minutes after the Defense Minister left, Sergio came to Ramos. Here, Ramos immediately assigned Sergio and his men to intercept Armando's group in the middle of the road and finish them there. But before that, Ramos again reminded Sergio to always be careful. The scene moves to Armando and his 4 members, who are on their way home. Shortly after, their car is attacked by Ramos's cartel men. This scene is the one we saw at the beginning of the film. Quickly, Armando's group got out of the car and eliminated the enemies one by one. Afterward, Armando asked his men to be ready, as he was sure another cartel group would be coming soon. Shortly after, Sergio and his men appeared shortly after, and a gun battle ensued between them. In this incident, Armando's troops were able to destroy Sergio's group, including Sergio himself, who had been successfully overthrown. Before he died, Sergio gave a message to Ramos, his brother. He said that he failed to finish off Armando's troops. Sergio also asked his brother to avenge him. After that, Armando's troops approached the cartels to take their weapons, including Sergio's mobile phone.
¡Completos, capitán!
2.5, no la mitad, capitán.
Then, Armando said that the enemy would definitely come back. Therefore, it would be very dangerous if they continued traveling by car. For this reason, Armando decided they should continue moving on foot through the forest. On the way, Armando contacted one of his colleagues at the military headquarters, asking him to evacuate his group once they had passed through the forest. This was done because Armando's troops must keep moving so that the enemy cannot surround them.
Pida que autorice una unidad de extracción para mi célula.
Lo veo en la garita.
At the same time, Ramos and his remaining men arrived at the scene of the previous incident. Ramos was furious that his brother, Sergio, had died at the hands of the Armando troops. There, Ramos promised that he would slaughter Armando's troops at any cost.
Te quiero, carnal.
After that, Ramos assigned one of his right-hand men, Cobra, to hunt down the Armando group. Cobra is a former Special Forces officer who is now Ramos's confidant. Before Cobra left, Ramos gave her a mobile phone that had been connected to Armando's mobile phone, which was the mobile phone given by the Minister of Defense. Of course, with this mobile phone, Cobra could easily find the location of Armando's troops. An hour later, Armando's troops were seen resting. They were all confident that the enemy would not be able to catch up with them. However, not long after, Armando saw Cobra and her group approaching. He immediately told everyone to get ready.
Sí, capitán.
Armando then ordered his troops to enter the forest for a more strategic position. When the opportunity came, Armando's troops attacked again. In this incident, all of Cobra's men were eliminated, while Cobra itself managed to escape. On the other hand, Armando's troops also suffered losses. 2 of them were hit by enemy shots. Luckily, they were treated immediately, as they still had a long way to go. After the 2 members were treated, Armando realized that the enemy had always been able to locate them. He was convinced the enemy had tapped into one of their mobile phones. Therefore, Armando asked for all the mobile phones belonging to his troops to be collected and stored elsewhere. At the same time, Ramos was seen returning with more troops. They consisted of corrupt policemen who had been in cahoots with him. Shortly after, Ramos met with Cobra. Cobra said that all her men had been killed. She then handed over a GPS phone connected to Armando's mobile phone. An hour later, Ramos's group stopped somewhere because, according to the GPS, Armando was nearby. However, it turned out to be all a trick as Armando's men had placed all their mobile phones on top of the bodies of Cobra's men. On the other hand, Armando's troops seemed to be resting after walking very far.
Cubre las 6. Vamos a descansar.
Armando, who was checking Sergio's mobile phone, which he had previously taken, was suddenly surprised when he found a video showing the defense minister talking to Ramos. At that moment, Armando and his troops realized that the defense minister had been a traitor. After that, Armando asked his men to continue their journey.
¿Buen festejo te armamos o no, mi pollo?
On the way, Armando's troops accidentally saw a building in the middle of the forest. When examined through binoculars, they saw that the people there carried weapons. Armando was convinced they were a group of criminals hiding in the forest. One of the members of Armando's troops then suggested they stop at the place because they were all thirsty and ran out of supplies while their ammunition was also running low. Long story short, Armando's troops decided to infiltrate the place. Then, they began to mercilessly eliminate the criminals there, one by one. After eliminating the criminals, Armando's troops accidentally found Atenea and her aunt, who had been held hostage.
Y mi compañero es médico.
Eso voy a revisar.
Finally, we are told that this place is a manufacturing site for illicit goods belonging to Ramos's group in the middle of the forest. After Atenea and her aunt calm down, they find a lot of ammunition. Then, Armando asks his troops if they will move back now or rest until nightfall.
¿Cómo están las mujeres?
Están en shock. Pero
After a short discussion, they all agreed to rest in this place. This was done because they were very tired.
Agarren suficiente munición. Equípense.
In the evening, Armando's troops were ready to continue their journey. However, before that, Armando ordered his members to put bulletproof vests on Atenea and her aunt. Once everything was ready, they immediately left the location. However, after just a few steps, Ramos's group suddenly arrived. Quickly, Armando's troops entered the building again, and the battle became even more fierce. At one point, Ramos told Cobra and some of his men to go to the back through a secret tunnel. Meanwhile, Armando's troops seemed frustrated, considering the number of enemies was very much. Then, Ramos's group was seen preparing automatic weapons. With their remaining energy, Armando's troops tried to counter the attack. When the battle calmed, Armando asked his troops in their respective positions if they were safe. Everyone answered that they were safe until one of them didn't say anything. As it turned out, the man was shot in the stomach. However, not long after, he also said he was still safe. Then, the man asked for ammunition because his supply was running low. Recklessly, Atenea brought a gun and handed it to the man, who was now hiding behind the warehouse. However, at the same time, Cobra and her men emerged from the tunnel. Now, there were only 4 men left in Armando's army. The 4 of them desperately went forward while Atenea and her aunt were asked to stay inside. Unfortunately, another member of Armando fell in this incident. However, in the end, Ramos, cornered and left alone, chose to surrender. Here, Ramos asked them to put him in prison according to the law. However, Armando realized that if Ramos was imprisoned, he would try to get free by bribing the authorities. Armando, therefore, challenged Ramos to a duel with him until one of them died. Ramos agreed to the offer, and the 2 of them dueled each other. Initially, Armando was cornered several times. However, in the end, he was able to turn the tables. Without hesitation, Armando immediately finished off Ramos.
Debería matarte.
Long story short, in the morning, reinforcements came to pick up. Armando's troops did not forget to report the Minister of Defense to the government, so he received the death penalty for his big betrayal.